I didn't make a sound. I just stood there in the hallway, hands still on the wall, listening to my father say my name like I was a line item in a budget spreadsheet. "Don't stress about it," he said. "Kyle's got good credit. We'll run it through him." Kyle. That's me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I heard my brother laugh, this easy, relieved laugh, and say, "Yeah, he won't mind." And my father said, "He doesn't have to know the details." I walked back to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, stared at the floor for a long time. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was closer to something finally clicking into place. Like I'd been looking at a picture my whole life, and only now, at 31 years old, standing in a hallway in my childhood home for Thanksgiving, did I finally see what it actually was. Let me back up. I grew up in a house where the rules were different depending on which son you were. My brother Damon is 4 years younger than me, and from the time he was old enough to want things, our parents made sure he had them. Not in an obvious way, not the kind you could point to and say, "Look, there it is, the favoritism, right there." It was subtler than that. It lived in the small decisions, the quiet assumptions, the way our parents talked about the future. When I was 16, I wanted to take a summer art program at the community college. It cost $340 dollars. My mother said they didn't have that right now. Maybe next summer. Next summer came and went. I got a job at a sandwich shop and paid for it myself the following year. When Damon was 16, he wanted a used car. Not a great one, a beater, something to drive to school. My father spent 3 weekends driving around looking at cars with him. They came home with a 2003 Civic that cost $4,200. I don't know where the money came from. I didn't ask. I told myself it wasn't about the money. That families go through different financial seasons. That maybe they were just in a better place by then. I was good at finding explanations that let everyone off the hook. I went to state school. Partial scholarship, student loans for the rest. My parents contributed exactly $0 to my tuition. I remember filling out the FAFSA in the school library, typing in my parents' income, watching the expected family contribution number come up, and thinking they could help. They just don't. Damon went to the same state school 3 years later. My parents paid his first 2 years in full. I found that out by accident. We were all at dinner, and my mother mentioned it casually, the way you mentioned that someone got a haircut. I put my fork down. I think I said something like, "Oh, really?" And my mother looked at me like she wasn't sure why that would be relevant information for me. I didn't bring it up again. I finished my degree, got a job in IT at a logistics company, moved into my own apartment. I built a life. A quiet, self-funded, nobody helped me build it life, and I was proud of it. I was genuinely proud. I kept my relationship with my family because I loved them. Because I believe that families are complicated and people make imperfect choices and love doesn't always look the way you need it to. I kept showing up. Birthday dinners, holidays, the occasional Sunday call. I did okay financially. Better than okay, honestly. I'd been careful from the start, no unnecessary debt, built up my savings, kept my credit clean. By my late 20s, my credit score was sitting comfortably in the high 700s. I knew what that number meant. I'd worked for it. I protected it the way some people protect a garden. Quietly, consistently. Not because anyone was watching, but because I knew it would matter someday. Damon, on the other hand. I won't go into all of it. It's not my story to tell in full, but Damon had made some choices. Financially, personally, that had consequences. He'd gotten into credit card debt in his mid-20s, borrowed money from friends, had a business idea that didn't work out the way he'd planned. None of it was catastrophic. People go through hard stretches. I understood that. What I didn't understand was what my parents had apparently decided to do about it. The weekend before that Thanksgiving, my father had called me. "Just to catch up," he said. We talked for about 15 minutes. He asked about work, I asked about them, we made small talk. Then at the end, almost like an afterthought, he mentioned that Damon was going through some things, and that it might be good if I could be available in the coming weeks. I said sure, of course, whatever he needs. I didn't ask what available meant. I should have. I drove down for Thanksgiving. It was just the 4 of us. Me, Damon, Mom, Dad. We had dinner, watched football, did all the things. It felt normal. Maybe a little tense under the surface, but nothing I could name. That night, I couldn't sleep. I'd heard something in my father's voice at dinner that I couldn't place. Something that sounded like a man who had already made a plan and was just waiting for the right moment to tell you about it. I got up around midnight to get a glass of water. The light was on in the den. I heard my father's voice. I stopped. The account's already overdrawn. If Damon applies now, his score is going to tank it. But if we use Kyle's name on the application... I stood there in the hallway. Cold floor. Dark house. My own name in my father's mouth, like a solution to a problem I hadn't agreed to be part of. He won't mind? Damon asked again. He doesn't have to know the details, my father said. I went back to my room. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I was at the breakfast table when my father came in. He made coffee, sat down, looked at me across the table with that same easy expression he'd always had. Like nothing. Like a man with a clean conscience. Sleep okay? He asked. Fine, I said. Yeah. I watched him pour cream into his coffee. I washed his hands. I thought about all the years I had given him the benefit of the doubt. All the years I had turned the math of my own childhood into something that made sense. Something forgivable. Something that didn't mean what it looked like. It meant. I helped clean up after breakfast. Said I had to get on the road early. Hugged my mother. Said I'd call during the week. Hugged my father. Drove home. Pulled into my parking garage. Sat in the car for a few minutes. Then I got to work. The first thing I did was call all 3 credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, and place a security freeze on my credit file. If anyone tried to open a new account, apply for a loan, or run a hard inquiry using my information, it would go nowhere. The freeze would block it. No exceptions without a PIN that only I had. It took maybe 40 minutes total. Each bureau has their own process, their own website. I took notes. I saved the PINs in my password manager. Then I logged into every financial account I had. Checkings, savings, investment accounts, and I changed the passwords. Not because my family had access to them. They didn't. But I wanted to know exactly what I had and where it was, with a clear before and after line drawn in the calendar. I made a list of everything I'd ever co-signed, everything I'd ever lent, every financial thread that connected me to my family. There were 2. A small personal loan I'd given Damon 2 years ago, that he'd mostly paid back, with about $600 still outstanding, and a phone plan that I'd added him to when he was between jobs. He'd been paying me back for it monthly, more or less on time. I took him off the phone plan that week, said I was switching carriers, simplifying things. True enough, the $600, I wrote it off in my head, not worth the conversation. I didn't call my father. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Naaman to confront him, to tell him I knew, to demand an explanation. There was nothing to demand. I'd heard what I'd heard. The plan was clear. The only question was whether I was going to let it happen. I wasn't. 3 weeks went by. My father called once. We talked for 8 minutes. He mentioned that Damon was still working through some things. He said almost conversationally that they'd been looking at some options, that there was a consolidation loan that might help, that it might make sense for someone with stronger credit to be on the application. He let that sentence hang in the air. I said, yeah, that's a tough situation. He waited. I said, I hope he figures something out. Another pause. Well, my father said, we'll see. We got off the phone. I thought about what it had taken for him to build up to that sentence. I thought about what it had taken for him to build up to that sentence. I thought about what he expected me to say. I thought about the version of me that would have said it, the version that had always found a way to be available, to absorb whatever the family needed, to solve the problem and ask questions later. I thought about that kid who paid for his own art class, who filled out the FAFSA alone in the school library, who carried his own weight for 31 years without once being asked how he was doing under all of it. That version of me had been very useful to a lot of people. My mother called 2 weeks after that. She was softer about it. That's always been her approach. She gets to the point eventually, but she wraps it in enough warmth that you almost don't notice you've been asked for something. She said she'd been thinking about how close Damon and I used to be when we were kids. She said it would mean a lot to him if I could step up during this hard time. She said family helps family. I said, Mom, I love you, and I love Damon, but I can't put my name on someone else's debt. She was quiet for a moment. We're not asking you to do anything permanent, she said. I know, I said. But the answer is still no. More quiet. He's your brother Kyle. I know he is. She didn't push further. But the silence had a weight to it. The particular weight of a disappointment that expects to be revisited. It wasn't. I want to be honest about what the next few months felt like. I want to say it was clean. That I made my decision and moved forward and felt strong and at peace. And in a way I did. But there's also a version of the story where I'm lying awake at 2 a.m., running through everything again, second-guessing, wondering if I was being cold, if I was being selfish, if there was something I could have done differently that would have helped my brother without gutting myself. That version of the story is also true. Because love doesn't disappear just because you stopped being useful. I still loved my family. I still wanted Damon to be okay. The freeze on my credit was not me punishing him, it was me protecting myself from a plan that had been made without my knowledge or consent. There's a difference. I kept having to remind myself of that. There's a question I'd been carrying for a long time. One I never let myself look at directly. What are you worth to these people if you have nothing to give? I was starting to find out. And the answer was uncomfortable. But knowing it, really knowing it, not suspecting it, not half knowing it while looking the other way, was different. The truth has a weight to it that's exhausting to carry. But at least you know what you're dealing with. In February, I called Damon directly. I hadn't spoken to him since Thanksgiving. I said I'd heard he was going through a rough stretch, and I was sorry about that. I said if he needed to talk, I was around. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did Dad talk to you about the loan thing?" "He mentioned it," I said, "and you said no." I said no. I said no. Another pause. "I told him not to ask you," Damon said. "I told him it wasn't fair." I didn't say anything for a second. "I appreciate that," I finally said. "I'm not him," Damon said. "I know how it's been. I know it hasn't been even." We talked for almost an hour. It was the most honest conversation I'd had with my brother in 10 years. Maybe ever. I didn't forgive everything in that phone call. Some things take longer than an hour. But I understood something I hadn't before. My brother and I had both been shaped by the same household, just differently. He'd been given everything and taught that it would always come. I'd been given nothing and taught that I had to figure it out. Neither of us had asked for those lessons. My father stopped calling in March. My mother still calls occasionally. We talk about small things. She doesn't mention the loan. I don't bring it up. There's a distance between us now that didn't exist before Thanksgiving, and I think we both know it's permanent, even if we're pretending it isn't. Some doors closed quietly. I bought a car this spring. Nothing fancy. A 4-year-old sedan with good mileage, paid for with money I'd saved over 3 years. I went to the dealership, handed over my credit information, watched the finance manager look at my score, and nod slowly in that way that means you're going to be fine. I was going to be fine. And I thought about my father's voice in that hallway. I thought about all the years I had made myself available, made myself useful, made myself small enough to fit inside whatever was needed from me. I thought about what it meant that the first time, the very first time, I said no to this family, clearly and without apology. The calls stopped. That told me everything I needed to know. A few months ago, I wrote my father a letter. Not an angry one. I want to be clear about that. I'd done enough of the anger on my own time, in my own space. The letter wasn't for the anger. The letter was for the record. I told him I'd been in the hallway that night. I told him I'd heard the whole thing. I told him I'd made my decision before he'd ever had a chance to ask me properly. Because I'd understood, finally, completely, that asking properly was never part of the plan. I told him about the art class, about the FASA, about the car, about every time I had paid my own way while watching someone else get carried, not to punish him with it, just to name it, just so he couldn't carry forward the idea that I hadn't noticed. I told him that I loved him, that this wasn't about hating him or cutting him off or being done with family. It was about being done with being the family ATM. About drawing a line I should have drawn years ago and just hadn't, because I kept hoping the math would eventually balance itself out. It doesn't balance itself out. You have to balance it yourself. I said I hoped we could have a relationship that wasn't built on what I could provide. And if we couldn't, If the only version of closeness on offer was the one where I keep my eyes forward and my name available, then I was okay with the distance. I'd lived with it long enough. I knew how. I sealed the envelope, put a stamp on it, dropped it in the mailbox outside my building on a Thursday morning. He hasn't responded. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. Either way, I know what I said, and I know it was true, and that's more than I had before I said it. I want to say something to whoever's watching this. If you've ever been a dependable one, the one who figured it out, the one who didn't need anything, the one whose name got floated in a hallway conversation as a solution to someone else's problem, I want you to hear this. Being reliable is not the same as being available for anything. Being capable is not an open invitation. Saying no to something that would hurt you is not a betrayal of the people you love. It is, in fact, one of the only ways to remain someone capable of love at all. Your credit score is yours. Your savings are yours. Your name on a document is yours. These aren't things you owe to anyone by virtue of being born into the same house. And if the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally only seem to call when they need something, that's information. Painful information. But information. You're allowed to use it. Drop a comment if any of this landed close to home. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you did when you finally said no. I want to hear it. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to protect yourself from people who love you, or say they do. It sounds like a cold thing to even think, but I've been sitting with it long enough now that I can say it plainly. The hardest boundaries to hold are not the ones you draw against strangers. They're the ones you draw inside your own family. At the kitchen table, over the phone, in a hallway at midnight, when the house is dark and your father doesn't know you're listening. What happened with my dad and Damon didn't come out of nowhere. That's the part I keep returning to. It was the end of a very long story that I'd been telling myself wrong for years. I'd been calling it family is complicated and everyone does their best, when what I actually needed to call it was this. A pattern. A consistent, years-long pattern where my needs were the ones that got adjusted when resources were tight and my brother's needs were the ones that got met. I didn't make that up. I just finally stopped explaining it away. There's something about that, about finally seeing a pattern clearly, that changes you. Not hardens you, changes you. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the only real question is what you're going to do with that information. Are you going to keep absorbing, keep being available, keep leaving the door open because closing it feels like giving up on people you love? I chose differently, and it cost something. I want to be honest about that. The distance between me and my parents now is real. The silence from my father after that letter is real. None of it feels like winning. But what I've learned, slowly, through a lot of uncomfortable honesty with myself, is that the alternative cost more. The version of me that would have said yes to that loan application, who would have let his name be used without being asked, who would have pretended he hadn't heard what he heard, that version was paying every single day. Just quietly, in ways nobody counted. What Damon said to me on that phone call stayed with me. I told him not to ask you. I know it hasn't been even. He saw it. He'd always seen it, and somehow that mattered more than anything my parents could have said, because it meant the truth of my childhood wasn't something I'd invented in my own head. It was real. It had witnesses. What I understand now is that integrity isn't just about being honest with other people. It's about being honest with yourself, about what you've experienced, what you've carried, what you're owed, and what you're not. It's about having the intelligence to read your own life clearly, even when reading it clearly is painful. And it's about having the resilience to act on what you see, even when acting on it means disappointing people who are counting on you to stay convenient. I worked for that credit score. I worked for everything I have, and the work was mine. Nobody gets to borrow it without asking. Not a stranger, not a brother, not a father. That's not cruelty. That's just finally knowing what belongs to you.